Good evening, Dr. Godkin. This is Tyler Parker. I'm in your MFT8115 class for Family Systems of Addiction, Family Systems Treatment for Addiction. And this is my week 7 assignment where I'm going to go over adolescent addiction. Specifically, I'm going to focus on alcohol addiction because especially after the documentary that was presented for this week, there's a lot of things that I can touch on in relation to that video. Tying that in with the reading, just making the whole topic a little bit more real, I guess you could say, because sometimes, of course, like the literature doesn't give you a clear picture of reality until you actually see it for yourself. So anyhow, so we're going to start with the challenges of treating adolescents who are addicted to alcohol. So some of the adolescents have greater challenges than adults when faced with addiction. That's the primary thesis, I guess you could say, of the entire presentation, is that adolescents are faced with more challenges just because of their age and where they lie along the path of development to becoming adults. So with all those things taken into consideration, you can pretty well assume that adolescents are going to have a harder time with addiction or come with more challenges than adults do. So in terms of the critical phases of development, drug and alcohol comes during a critical development period when addiction arises in adolescence. So adolescents are, as we all know, at a very critical phase in their development in becoming adults. And during that phase, they're going through a lot of changes, discovering who they are. They're very much influenced by their peer relationships and things like that. And so developing an addiction during that phase can be pretty hard. So there are some social risks involved. Definitely unhealthy peer relationship patterns emerge, especially in the documentary. Laura seemed to have some pretty bad peer relationships. She chose to hang out with the wrong people, and that sort of kind of reinforced her behaviors and her thoughts about those behaviors, that these things are acceptable because the people around me that I've chosen to hang around with are thinking that these things are acceptable. So that's really difficult, especially when an adolescent is trying to form their identity. They could form their identity around sort of the wrong things or things that are not very healthy and helpful for them. Risk of abuse by older adults is higher due to being adolescent. So as we saw in the video too, Laura was being abused essentially by 4 men. It was 2 men and it was 4 men in a motel room with her friend. Because she was so young, she was at greater risk of a situation like that happening, because there are people in this world who would like to take advantage of people who are younger and who are being influenced by the wrong people. So definitely she has, and all adolescents do have that risk factor involved with them, because they're not old enough, they don't know a whole lot of things, they're more susceptible to being taken advantage of. So there are benefits and burdens to being an adolescent and uncovering this, series of developments with respect to addiction. So how does the development stage of being an adolescent either help or hinder an adolescent success in treatment? So, let's start with the benefits. So first of all, there's a chance to set a strong tone and foundation that drug and alcohol abuse is not acceptable early. So if a child is still trying to formulate what is the right thing to do, what is the wrong thing to do, having a very, I guess you could say, real experience with those things early on is actually an opportunity, because if done right, if treatment is successful, then the child will have that strong foundation from the very beginning, like, hey, I know that this doesn't work, let me try not to be this way when I'm an adult. Pattern, and part and parcel with that, patterns are still being developed, so there's an opportunity to change them. So at that time, children are quite moldable. If you can find the right set of influences, or get to them early enough, then you have an opportunity to really change those kids' developmental patterns for the better. So it's actually a good thing to be covering those things when a child is young, rather than when they're older, when they're pretty well set in their ways, I guess you could say. Burdens, obviously, they're at a vulnerable age where peers and fitting in factor heavily. So just like in the case of Laura, she really wanted to be well liked by her peers, so she was willing to do things like acid and drink and do all sorts of things just so that she would be accepted and loved by other people, because it sounded like she had pretty low self-esteem, and her self-esteem was basically predicated on how much other people liked her or thought she was attractive and things like that. Limited autonomy. So let's take, for example, stepping away from Laura. So let's say that we have, an adolescent whose living situation is not so great. They don't have a lot of the freedom and opportunity to change their living situation because they're living with someone else. So let's say, for example, like a child is an alcoholic, and also her mom and dad are also alcoholics. Without getting CPS involved, or whatever the case may be, that child does not have the ability to determine their own fate. And so that is quite a burden when you're trying to make positive impacts and changes in children's lives, because they don't have the ability to just, pack up and move across the country or whatever to make their situation better. So that's not good. So from the systemic point of view, in what ways can a systemic point of view be particularly helpful in treating an adolescent with substance abuse issues? There's a lot of really great things to be said from the strategic point of view, or systemic point of view, when it comes to substance abuse in adolescents. We're going to go into some of those things, like the efficacy of treatment, support, that can be formed around the adolescent, and also the systemic influences of SUDs are uncovered through the systemic lens. But that's more, that slide is supposed to say critical lens, but I couldn't get it to say that, but we'll get into that. So efficacy, family therapy is efficacious in treating substance use disorders. So definitely the literature points to that. If you can get the whole family on board with treating the alcohol abuse, you're more than likely going to have good outcomes, because the family forms that support network for that adolescent who's going through those things. And it's almost like, they can take therapy home with them because they have someone who they can talk to, correspond with, interact with at home, who is on board with their success and their abstinence. So definitely family therapy is a great way to treat that, because parents still are that figure of authority and are responsible for their children, even if they're really not doing a super good job at it at that particular moment. Support. So along with that, family support systems can be built in to help curb addiction. So let's go back to the instance of Laura. With her parents, they were pretty permissive. They didn't have a whole lot of really solid boundaries set up, and they were even having a hard time going back and forth, and should we have alcohol in the house or not when we know our daughter's an alcoholic, which just seemed like they should have moved past that and understood that, if my daughter has been, in a motel room with 4 guys because she can't stay off drugs or alcohol, like, seems like it would be a pretty easy decision not to have alcohol in the house. But then again, they're going through their own situation. I'm sure they have a counselor who's really trying to work with them. But if parents can come around and really provide for their kids the support network that they need, the boundaries and the structure that they need to be successful, the therapist's job is a whole lot easier, because you have supports built in with the family who know exactly what it's going to take to keep this adolescent abstinent. Or if you take the harm reduction model, like, not going to end up on the 6 o'clock news or whatever. So within the critical lens, systemic influences of SUDs are uncovered. So it's great to have a systemic perspective, because you're not just looking at, alcoholism from whatever model, the disease model or whatever model you choose, but you're actually able to point to individuals who are involved in that process of creating that substance use disorder, and how their behaviors, thoughts, and ideas and things sort of help to keep the SUD around, or definitely facilitate that. So working through those issues in the family therapy setting is really crucial, because, like, for example, if you have someone who goes to like Al-Anon or gets any sort of other treatment, and that's on an individual basis, when they come back into that family situation, there might be some triggers in there, different things that are going to sort of facilitate that substance use, that are unintentional on the part of the family, of course, but are there. But had it not been thoroughly analyzed and scrutinized in a systemic perspective, those things might not be addressed and able to change for the better. Best practices. What are the best practices for treating adolescent substance abuse? There are quite a few, quite a few. So research points to these are just the available and efficacious models, not necessarily the most cost effective, but standard behavioral couples therapy, that's pretty normal. Multisystemic therapy, multidimensional family therapy, family support network, adolescent community reinforcement approach, and interactional couples group therapy. So there's a number of different models that, as long as they address the systemic process of maintaining substance use disorders within the adolescence world, those are predictably efficacious. There are some that are cost effective in terms of how much it costs for treatment for a single person and what is the degree of efficacy. So through that calculation, the best practices for cost efficacy are the following: brief relationship therapy, behavioral couple marital therapy, or BCT and BMT, motivational enhancement treatment with cognitive behavioral therapy for 5 sessions, BMT alpha, BMT Charlie, and other marital therapy. So there are a wide range, again, of different therapy models that are available for adolescents who suffer from substance use disorders. But of course, there are some that are a little bit better than others, just based on cost per client, and also degree of efficacy, and what the predictable outcomes are going to be for that. All right, so the unique challenges facing adolescents with addiction, there are many. We kind of touched on a few of them in the first slide, but definitely the top 3 would be school demographics, availability of opportunities to use, home life, and family issues. So school demographics plays a pretty big role when you look at the ethnicity of the adolescent in question, and whether they have, they call the critical mass number of like ethnicity adolescents at their school. So let's say, for example, like you're the only black kid or one of a few black kids in an all-white school, you're likely to use substances because of not feeling included or not feeling very good about your social setting. But if you are in a group of kids at your school where you're not just the only black kid, but you're one of maybe half, 50% of the school population who is black, you're probably going to feel a lot better about your social surroundings because you're surrounded by people who are of your own ethnicity. Availability of opportunities to use. So going back to Laura, for example, her mom would come home, at the normal time after 5 o'clock, but that time between her getting off school and her mother coming home was a huge opportunity for her to engage in illicit activities without her mom's knowledge. And just like in the video, she would tell her mom some things, but she wouldn't tell her mom everything. So her mom was like, oh, at least she's telling me something. But she had plenty of opportunities to go and do the wrong thing, whether it came to ditching school or whatever the case may be. She doesn't sound like she was involved in any positive after-school activities or anything like that, so that she could fill her time between her mom getting home with something that was, of value that her mom would appreciate and would keep her from using. Home life and family issues. So this is definitely where the systemic problems come into play. Like, for example, Laura's family, didn't really seem like they had a lot of structure, and Laura seemed to really suffer from that. There are a few things that she said on a couple different instances in the video where she had mentioned that, her mom would try and institute some sort of, way to prevent her from using drugs, but then she would just come back with a quip that said, well, if you do that, I'll just do this, and blah, blah, blah. So her mom would never do anything. And her mom was very permissive about not providing boundaries and things like that. And that was really a problem. So, through the myriad, structural issues that the family had, that was more than likely a great contributing factor to her, to Laura actually using and getting onto all those situations that she did, because she didn't have that firm family structural foundation to be able to fall back on. So, family and success. What are the ways in which a family can increase or decrease the success of recovery? So family has a lot to do with that, especially if you're going to use the family therapy model. Knowing that it's efficacious, there are some ways that, it can really help you out, and it can actually really be bad too. So structure, parents with strong structure and boundaries can increase treatment success. That kind of goes without saying, but I mean, the research points to the same thing as well. If the kids know what the boundaries are, what parents are responsible for, what the children themselves are responsible for, and there's not, just, the parentified child situation, or, just a complete absence of boundaries because the parents don't want to be too imposing and things like that. That's really not good for the kid. That's really not good for the kid at all, and it can lead them to pretty much doing whatever they want. So that can help when that's very well put into place. What cannot help when parents that are not on board with creating the environment to help the addict recover decreases the chance of success. That sounds like Laura's situation immediately after her recovery. Her mom especially, was really not, didn't want to think of her daughter as an alcoholic, and really didn't want to think about her own family history with alcoholism. And so, and even things such as like, tearing out the pages of her diary about the bad stuff and then being like, well, we'll just start over. And then, Laura comes back home and there's alcohol in the house and she's very tempted to drink it. That's really not going to help Laura's situation very much. If, the whole family is not bought into, we're going to make this situation better, we're going to do this to have our, child be successful or abstinent or whatever the case may be, that's really going to hurt therapy. So if a kid comes back, from a retreat or something like that after they've been gone for a while and they've got all these brand new ideas about who they are or whatever, and they come home and it's the same situation with the same triggers or the same opportunities, it's very likely that they're going to relapse. So, all right. So all that taken together is adolescent addiction and the way to conceive of it and things to do about it, and potential pitfalls, challenges, unique situations, and things like that. All of this stuff came from the reading provided and also from the video, as you can see on the references pages, and I also have a continuation of the references right there. Yeah, but anyhow, that is the conclusion of this presentation. I thank you very much for your time.